SN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
We are back, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. This is Kerry Lutz, and you've heard him before. Don Watkins, best-selling author, one of today's most vocal opponents of the welfare state. And you know there are many of them. You hear them here on the Financial Survival Network. He's fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute, and he's got a new book that's just come out called Rooseveltcare. And we've talked about it before, but Don is back. Don, welcome.
Great to be back.
Hey, so this whole concept here of society going to basically, you're going to pay into this trust fund. You're going to pay into it. Your employer is going to pay into it. But in reality, you're paying into it because the money that your employer pays into it is money that you would otherwise probably get in salary, right? So this pot of money is going to be there for your retirement, but in reality, we know that the government's already spent it. So the thing didn't work, and it was kind of designed to fail, wasn't it?
Well, this is one of the things that bothers me the most about Social Security and the debate over Social Security. We can debate whether it's a good or bad thing, but that becomes very hard because Social Security has been presented since the beginning to Americans in a really dishonest fashion. So you gave one example, which is the fact that the taxes, the payroll taxes that we pay towards Social Security, which for most Americans are by far the greatest tax burden that we face, that's always been nominally split, half between you and half between your employer. And so if you look at how much Social Security is costing you on your paycheck, that is actually, you have to double it to get the true weight of what you're paying, the true burden. Because you're absolutely right. As economists have known since the beginning, Social Security, all of that is really taken out of your paycheck. And Social Security knows this because if you're self-employed, you have to pay the entire 12.4% of your income to Social Security. Now, the second part of the lie is that this is going into some sort of savings and investment insurance program so that you are paying for your future retirement benefits. But that's completely untrue. All Social Security does is it takes money from young working people and it gives it to retirees. That's it. You're not paying for your future. You're not paying for your future payments and benefits. All that's happening is that you're paying for other people's retirement needs, and then you're given a pat on the back and says, you'll probably get to do this to your kids and grandkids' generation. But of course, there's no guarantee of that, and there's no freedom to say, I don't want to be part of this whole scheme. I'm perfectly competent to prepare for my own financial needs, and that's my money, and I should be able to do with it what I choose.
Right. And we both know that that the scheme is running on fumes right now, and it's running. Basically, it was supposed to be self-funding for another 20 or 30 years, but in reality, it's starting to run a deficit now, and the assets that it holds are basically IOUs from the federal government, right? That's its big trust fund, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's true that there is a so-called trust fund in Social Security. And really since the early 1980s, Social Security has been taking in way more in taxes than it pays out in handouts to the elderly. But that money wasn't saved and invested. It wasn't set aside the way that you would set aside money to pay for your kid's education when he or she gets older. What happened was it was spent on other government programs in exchange for government bonds. And the simplest way to think about it is that in order to pay those bonds, once Social Security starts cashing them in, which it has for the last 4 years now, where does that money come from? Well, it has to come from one of two places, either more taxes or more government borrowing, which have to be paid back ultimately in more taxes. So there really is no trust fund. There's a future and current tax obligations fund. And so the significance of the trust fund, though, there is a significance of it. It's not completely meaningless. Legally, Social Security can only pay out of the taxes that it receives this year or through the bonds in its trust fund. And once those bonds run out, then one of two things has to happen. Either Social Security taxes have to be raised, and right now it looks like to keep the program going for another 75 years, your payroll tax would have to go up on the order of 4%, which is a 30% increase of probably what's your biggest tax is. Or benefits, the handouts have to be slashed, and they have to be slashed by about 25%, which means that, the person who's getting $1,000 a month will suddenly find himself with only $750 a month. And the longer we wait to address that problem, the more abrupt and destructive and expensive our options will be. And that's why I think it's really important to have this conversation now, while we have more options and are able to actually allow people to adapt to this reality rather than wait until the last minute when it will become infinitely more painful than it would now.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because it's held, the surplus is held in IOUs from the federal government, which is running a huge deficit, and the deficit that the federal government is running is actually reduced by the surplus from the surplus of Social Security. So they're kind of getting it both ways, and this is going to be a disaster here in the making, because, like you say, either the taxes have to go way up, or the benefits have to be cut, or both, or a little bit of both. And as we see with the VA, the government, one way or the other, is going to start breaking promises. And while this might be the last promise that gets broken, it's going to break it at some point, right?
Well, and this just illustrates why the whole conception of I'm going to allow the government to take control of my retirement is so dangerous and so reckless, because it's true that life is inherently risky, and if you're having to make your own savings and investment decisions, you have to work really hard and think carefully about where to put your money and how to protect it and so on. But government doesn't give you any security. Indeed, it gives you insecurity, because at least if you're using your own money, it's your control. You can decide where to put the money. You can decide how careful to be, how much security you value. And with government, they can change the terms at any time. So they'll often refer to Social Security as an earned benefit out of one side of their mouth. But the law and the Supreme Court has been explicit on this, that you have no right to any payment from Social Security. The government can change it at any time. It can increase your taxes at any time. And you have no contractual rights in the issue. And so we're totally at the mercy of the government. And I think that is a really dangerous way and a very insecure way to structure your life and your financial future.
Yeah. And, it's like, oh, don't worry about it. You can retire at 66 or 68 or 70 years old. And so many of you out there were planning to retire at 65 years old. And all that planning goes down the drain, right, Tom?
Yeah, that's right. So in 1983, there was a special deal made by Reagan, or really pushed by Reagan, to save Social Security. Social Security faced a crisis, and Reagan had just come into office, and it was a real opportunity to say, hey, look, if we don't do anything, the program's going to be done for, and so let's push to free the system. But instead, they doubled down and worked to save it. And so ever since then, one of the things that happened then was the increasing the age at which you could retire, which is really, again, it's taking money out of people's pockets in effect, because it says your support for the system was based on the idea that at 65, after paying this much taxes, you're going to receive this much in handouts. And now we've changed it at a whim. And so again, it's revealing the insecurity of the program. And so if you contrast that with what people would do if you just had a free society where your money was yours to prepare your life as you wish, you would get to decide what age do I want to retire on if I want to retire? And you can structure things in that way and have the security of knowing that that was up to you and within your control, instead of being at the mercy of what bureaucrats decide and can change at the flip of a coin.
Yep. And as long as the program is there making promises, it alters people's behavior. It alters your behavior in terms of how you plan. And then eventually you wind up disappointed, right?
Yeah, and think about it. It puts you. It's really put people in an awful situation. Some people refer to what's going on with Social Security as generational theft, because young people today, particularly those just being born, are going to face enormously huge costs, and no way will they be able to get any fraction of what has been promised to Americans under the system. But the real but nevertheless, the current recipients, or the people who are going to be receiving Social Security payments soon, have equally been victims, because many Americans who could have been self-supporting and prosperous, a large chunk of the money that they could have used to plan for their lives and prepare for old age was taken from them. And so they're in an impossible situation too, which is, maybe I don't want to really create this awful world for my kids and grandkids, but what am I going to do? I couldn't survive without Social Security. And so we really put ourselves in a corner, and I still think there are ways out of it, but none of them will be painless. All of them are going to be difficult. And so you have to really think through, what should be our goal? Should it be to save Social Security? Or can you actually have a free system where each person is liberated to plan for his life as he judges best, and, of course, help the people and causes that he cares about?
Yeah, and makes, complete sense, because, in the end, whether you like it or not, you're going to be responsible for your retirement with or without Social Security, right? Because it's probably not going to be enough to get you through to the end.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true, and it's a real injustice. Part of it, but it's not just an issue of old age, because the fact is that people have different goals and dreams and ambitions in life. And if you're somebody who just wants to, live modestly in old age, or maybe work as long as you can work, you might have goals and priorities that you could have used that 12.4% for when you're younger. And so when I think of the welfare state, part of what I think of is you want to translate those, percentages and dollar figures into real values that you're being forced to surrender. And so, I'll tell you something a little personal, which is my wife and I would love to have another child. But, we're just a few $100s away from being able to afford it. And so we have to put off this enormous value, which, if our money was not being taken from us and handed to other people for their retirement, we would actually be able to achieve a really important value and dream. And so I think it's important, precisely because these dollars don't come out of our wallet. They disappear silently in our paycheck. Most of us don't even look at what Social Security takes from us, right? We just look at our after-tax income. Look at it, think about it, and think what you're being asked to surrender, what you're being made to surrender, and think about the incredible injustice that's involved in that. Think about how we would react to an employer if an employer just said, I want you to work for a week without pay just because I say so. I want extra money for my vacation. You would say that's outrageous. That's an injustice. And yet Social Security alone, never mind the rest of the welfare state, Social Security alone forces us to work more than a month each year just to pay for other people's benefits and handouts. That is so unfair that it is really outrageous that people regard this as a moral program rather than what it is, which is a totally unjust program.
Yeah. Well, hey, we'll be talking more when we return on the Financial Survival Network.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Urgent alert. Ex-Secret Service agent claims it's worse than people know. One of Obama's former Secret Service agents recently smelled a rat. What he discovered inside our government was so devastating, he only saw one option. He quit. What's worse, he fears what he found could affect your job, your neighborhood, and most importantly, your family, very soon. It's worse than people know, he said in a recent interview, and I'm not trying to scare you either. We too share his concerns. This is why we've devoted the better part of 3 years collecting solutions for nearly all problems created by intrusive governments, and we've succeeded. Go to hiddensecrets1.info to check out all the details. Our panel of insiders have devised a legal but sneaky set of solutions to help you reclaim your privacy from the NSA, opt out of Obamacare, and make a bundle from little-known investments and small business opportunities. Simply visit hiddensecrets1.info. That's hidden secrets, the number 1.info.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
We're back on the Financial Survival Network with Don Watkins of the Ayn Rand Institute, talking about his new book, Rooseveltcare. And, I guess the title sums it up best, Don. It's really just another welfare program and, in a way, a Ponzi program where the people who get in first get the best deal and the people who get in later really wind up shouldering the burden. It's a pyramid scheme, right?
There are definitely similarities, and indeed the defenders of the system have sometimes said it's the greatest Ponzi scheme ever because unlike a private Ponzi scheme, we can keep it going because, after all, the economy is always going to grow. We're always going to be more prosperous. Now, trouble is, that's not necessarily true because what if, for instance, you had a baby boom generation who just didn't have as many kids as their parents did? Well, suddenly the whole system is going to run into problems because there's fewer people able to pay the benefits. And so in the early years of Social Security, you had, depending on what time frame you look at, sometimes roughly about 15 workers for every retiree. And that's a burden to have to, pay 1/15 of somebody else's retirement, but it's not a huge burden. However, today we have only 3 workers for each retiree. And by the way, each retiree is getting way more in benefits than their parents and grandparents did. And that's going to actually go down to about 2 workers per retiree, while overall benefits for the elderly will be increasing from $30,000 per capita a year to $40,000 per capita a year. So you basically have, just for the old age welfare programs alone, young people are going to be responsible essentially for $20,000 a year to pay for the elderly. I mean, that's unsustainable. And so it's, there is definitely differences between a government system and a Ponzi scheme, but there's a fundamental similarity, which is exactly what you said, which is that, the early people who don't have to pay much and get to take a bunch of money from younger people, they financially do quite well. But that is not sustainable because ultimately those people who are being built to their money, they're going to get old. And so whatever they, quote, get back will pale in comparison.
Hey, and let's not forget disability is all part of this scam as well, right? And look what's happening there. Got 11 million people on disability across the country.
Yeah, and there is a real question. How much is that legitimate? How much are people turning to that as a substitute for other forms of government welfare that have been rolled back or that have time limits and so on? I would say one point, though, to keep in mind, which is clearly like you as an individual, and then when you're thinking of other people, it's really awful to think about, well, if you're disabled and can't work, what would happen to you? But just note, by the way, there was private disability insurance, and there may be even some today. And so it's not an alternative of, do we have a government handout program or do disabled people just get left in the streets? No, preparing for disability is something that one could do in a free market. And then there would be real incentives to both keep out people defrauding the system, the private insurers, and an incentive for insurers to actually please the legitimate people who are legitimately disabled, precisely because they want to be able to attract customers to their insurance program. The government has no such incentives. And so you get this incredible mess of people who are probably gaming the system, and probably there's a lot of people who aren't gaming the system and aren't able to get the disability payments that on a free market they would really deserve.
Yeah, exactly. And, basically that disability trust fund, if you could call it that, but that is what they call it, is broke, right? And it's also...
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be running out. I think 2016 or 17 is when it's projected to run out. And so it'll be interesting to see what the government does to deal with that problem. We'll have fewer options when we get to the retirement fund running out in the early 2030s, it looks like. But it'll at least give us a really tragic but insightful look at what happens when you wait to the last minute to deal with an enormous problem.
Yeah, 11 million people collecting it, which kind of corresponds to the number of people who have dropped out of the workforce, since 2009. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, we still have a lot of economic problems. I would argue that it's because of a number of factors, but mostly government intervention and regulation strangling the people who would create new businesses and new jobs. Those people are looking for the people locked out of jobs to the extent that this is what is reflected in the Social Security disability numbers. This has been one mechanism for getting handouts, but it's a really bad one because there's really an incentive once you get those benefits not to leave the system, and so what I worry about is that there's people who could eventually recover, get new jobs, live a prosperous life, who won't want to give up those benefits, and that's expensive for the people who have to pay for them, and it's tragic because one of the most fulfilling things and sources of happiness we have is a fulfilling, productive career, and people who give that up because they're too scared to lose their disability payments will really be, it's too weak a metaphor, but shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, literally and figuratively. And this is really bad. It's becoming an intractable problem, and it's almost becoming yet another welfare program, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to have that perspective on all of these programs. That what they are is it's part of a welfare state, and the basic idea behind a welfare state is that instead of you supporting your own life through productive work, the government is going to guarantee you certain outcomes, benefits, services, and so on. And one of the really destructive things about that is that it makes people financially dependent on the government, but then it encourages a real dependency and discourages a real independence in regards to how one lives. And it also makes it far more difficult then to fight for any more freedom. So, for instance, if you remember Obama's "You Didn't Build That" comment, it was, you guys drive on roads, you went to government schools, how dare you claim that you have a right to what you earn? Well, if everybody's getting their health care and their child care and their retirement and everything is coming from the government, then how are you supposed to stand up and say, I earned anything? I have the right to what I earned. I have the freedom to make independent decisions about my life. No way, man. You got everything from society, and so now society owns you. And that is exactly the line of argument that the defenders of the welfare state take. And one of the things in Social Security that should be so alarming is that people like Senator Elizabeth Warren are fighting to expand Social Security and are fighting against private savings mechanisms like 401ks. They want to dismantle the private retirement planning efforts of individuals and expand and make people far more dependent on government retirement, which means the complete dependence of elderly Americans then, and ultimately all Americans, on the state. And I mean, there's a lot to say about that, but one thing is for sure, that has nothing to do with the American way of life, the American dream, and the founding fathers' vision. Exactly,
and we'll leave it on that. Just Don, tell us where we find your work, the best website to connect with you on.
So they can find my book, Rooseveltcare, How Social Security is Sabotaging the Land of Self-Reliance, on Amazon. And all of my work can be found on endthedebtdraft.com.
Okay, and the link will be found on the show notes to this interview on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get the first 5 chapters of my book forget Wall Street, go for the gold complimentary. And thanks so much for being on, Don. Always a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.